The most dangerous mistake you can make is laughing at the only person who already knows the truth. Those words would haunt everyone inside the executive boardroom before the day was over. Morning sunlight poured through the towering glass walls of Ashton Technologies, casting long reflections across polished marble floors and the sleek conference table where the company's most influential leaders had gathered. Outside, downtown Chicago buzzed with its usual energy, but inside the room, every conversation revolved around one subject. The company was preparing to secure the largest partnership in its history, a contract worth hundreds of millions of dollars that would define the future of the business for years to come. Executives adjusted expensive suits, financial advisors reviewed forecasts, and department directors waited for the final presentation to begin. At the head of the table stood Claire Morgan, the respected chief executive officer whose confidence had become legendary throughout the technology industry. She believed preparation and authority solved every problem, and very few people had ever challenged her judgment. Near the end of the conference table sat Nathan Brooks, a 43-year-old systems engineer and single father whose quiet nature often caused people to overlook him. Wearing a simple blue work shirt beneath a worn navy jacket, he looked noticeably different from the executives surrounding him. Resting beside his chair was a weathered leather folder filled with engineering reports he had spent months preparing. Claire began reviewing the company's expansion strategy while enormous digital displays illuminated the room with charts, financial projections, and technical diagrams. When she finished speaking, she asked if anyone had final concerns before the agreement moved forward. Nathan slowly raised his hand. The room became still as he respectfully stood. "Ms. Morgan," he said calmly, "I believe there is one critical issue inside the system architecture that deserves another review before we finalize the agreement." Claire folded her arms and looked toward him with visible impatience. "Mr. Brooks," she replied, "this meeting is for executive decision makers. We have already received opinions from nationally recognized consultants." Nathan remained respectful. "I understand. I only believe one overlooked detail could place the entire project at risk." A few people exchanged uncertain glances, but before Nathan could continue, Claire smiled politely in a way that carried unmistakable dismissal. "Sometimes," she said loudly enough for everyone to hear, "experience includes knowing when not to interrupt people with greater responsibility." Quiet laughter spread around the conference table. Several executives lowered their eyes while others forced uncomfortable smiles, unwilling to challenge the chief executive officer in front of the board. Nathan did not argue. He simply placed his hand on the leather folder and nodded. "I appreciate the opportunity to speak," he answered. Claire gestured toward the presentation screen. "We cannot delay progress because every employee believes they have discovered a hidden problem." The room laughed again, this time a little louder. Nathan quietly gathered his folder without showing anger, embarrassment, or resentment. As he turned toward the conference room door, sunlight reflected across the glass walls while the distant sounds of Chicago traffic drifted upward from the streets below. He paused for only a brief moment before speaking one final sentence. "I sincerely hope I am wrong." Without waiting for a response, he walked out of the boardroom with calm dignity, leaving behind the only complete analysis capable of preventing what was about to unfold. Inside the room, the laughter faded, the meeting resumed, and no one realized that the quiet engineer they had just ridiculed carried a truth powerful enough to silence every voice before the day reached its end. The heavy conference room door closed softly behind Nathan Brooks, leaving the sound of distant laughter on the other side of the polished glass walls. He stood alone in the quiet hallway for only a moment before pressing the elevator button. His expression never revealed disappointment. Years of raising his daughter alone had taught him that dignity often meant walking away without allowing another person's opinion to define his worth. As the elevator descended through the towering headquarters of Ashton Technologies, Nathan rested one hand on the worn leather folder containing months of engineering research. Every page represented long evenings spent studying system architecture after putting his 12-year-old daughter, Lily, to bed. Every recommendation had been carefully documented, tested, and submitted through proper channels. None of it had been prepared to earn recognition. It had been written to protect the company from a risk he believed was growing larger every week. Outside, cool autumn air greeted him as he crossed the busy streets of downtown Chicago toward the parking garage where his aging pickup truck waited. The afternoon traffic moved steadily beneath gray clouds, while people hurried between office buildings without noticing the quiet engineer carrying information that could change everything. Instead of replaying the humiliation inside the boardroom, Nathan drove toward Lincoln Elementary School. Within minutes, smiling children poured through the front entrance, searching for familiar faces. Lily spotted her father immediately and ran across the sidewalk, carrying an oversized backpack nearly as large as herself. "Hi, Dad," she said brightly after climbing into the truck. "Did your important meeting go well?" Nathan smiled warmly before fastening his seat belt. "It was an interesting day," he answered honestly. "Tell me about yours first." Lily spent the drive home describing her science experiment, an upcoming history quiz, and a classmate she had helped during math. Nathan listened carefully, asking questions and celebrating every small achievement with genuine pride. By the time they reached their modest brick home in the suburbs, the tension from downtown had quietly disappeared beneath the ordinary rhythm of family life. After dinner, they washed dishes together, completed homework around the kitchen table, and laughed while trying to solve a difficult crossword puzzle. Later that evening, after Lily went upstairs, Nathan carried his leather folder into the converted garage behind the house. The small workspace contained shelves filled with engineering manuals, neatly organized tools, computer monitors, handwritten notebooks, and a large whiteboard covered with technical diagrams. A single desk lamp illuminated the room as rain began tapping gently against the windows. Nathan opened the latest system reports and compared them with the documents he had already prepared months earlier. The patterns matched exactly. The overlooked weakness inside the company's infrastructure had continued expanding beneath every routine update, just as he had predicted. He quietly marked another note inside his notebook before looking at a framed photograph of Lily sitting on the corner of his desk. "I hope they discover it in time," he whispered. At that very moment, several miles away inside Ashton Technologies, the executive celebration ended abruptly as warning notifications suddenly appeared across every operations screen. Engineers rushed toward their workstations while emergency alerts echoed through the technology center. The partnership systems that executives had confidently approved only hours earlier were beginning to fail one after another. And somewhere inside the executive offices, Claire Morgan slowly realized that the quiet engineer she had dismissed might have been the only person who truly understood what was happening. By sunrise the following morning, the atmosphere inside Ashton Technologies had changed completely. The confidence that had filled the executive floor only hours earlier had disappeared beneath an unrelenting wave of emergency meetings, flashing warning notifications, and increasingly anxious conversations. Engineers crowded around massive monitoring screens as system performance continued to decline despite every attempt to stabilize the company's infrastructure. Financial analysts updated projections almost every 15 minutes, each report carrying worse news than the one before it. Several major partners had temporarily suspended implementation of the new platform until the technical failures could be explained, placing hundreds of millions of dollars in future revenue at risk. Inside the executive conference room, Claire Morgan stood before the board of directors studying a wall of red warning indicators reflected across the polished glass walls. The room that had laughed the previous afternoon now remained unusually quiet. "Has anyone identified the root cause?" Claire asked. The lead technology consultant slowly shook his head. "We have isolated symptoms," he admitted. "We still cannot explain why every repair creates another failure somewhere else." No one answered after that. Every executive understood that time was running out. Across the city, Nathan Brooks followed the same simple routine that had guided his life for years. After taking Lily to school, he returned to the converted garage behind his modest home carrying a cup of coffee and the familiar leather folder. The small workspace remained peaceful despite the growing crisis unfolding downtown. Morning sunlight filtered through the windows as Nathan reviewed engineering logs beside handwritten notebooks filled with observations gathered over several months. He quietly compared the newest public system status reports with archived infrastructure records he had carefully preserved long before the company recognized the danger. Every comparison confirmed the same conclusion. The original architectural weakness continued spreading beneath the surface because every emergency repair addressed visible failures instead of the hidden synchronization flaw at the center of the network. Nathan slowly added another note to his notebook before closing it with quiet certainty. He knew exactly how the problem had begun. He also knew no one had asked him to explain it. Back inside Ashton Technologies, the board ordered a complete review of every engineering recommendation submitted during the previous year. Administrative staff searched digital archives while project managers opened forgotten technical files stored deep inside the company's document management system. Hours later, one operations director carried several archived folders into the conference room. As employees sorted through months of overlooked reports, one document immediately drew attention. The cover displayed the name Nathan Brooks along with a submission date nearly 7 months earlier. Claire opened the report and began reading in complete silence. The first page described the same hidden synchronization risk currently threatening the company. The second explained how future software updates would gradually magnify the defect if preventive action was delayed. The following pages contained diagrams, testing results, implementation schedules, and practical recommendations designed to eliminate the problem before customers were ever affected. Claire continued turning pages until she reached the final section, where every prediction matched the crisis now unfolding across the organization with unsettling precision. She slowly lowered the report onto the conference table while every executive watched her expression change. One board member quietly broke the silence. He tried to warn us. Claire looked toward the empty chair where Nathan had been sitting the previous afternoon. For the first time since the crisis began, she realized the quiet engineer had never interrupted the meeting to seek recognition. He had stood because he was trying to protect everyone inside that room, and the truth resting inside his forgotten folder had already begun silencing every voice that once refused to hear him. Late that afternoon, the executive conference room at Ashton Technologies no longer resembled the confident place Nathan Brooks had quietly left the day before. The polished table was now covered with engineering reports, financial projections, handwritten notes, and emergency updates arriving faster than anyone could process them. The giant display screens that had once presented optimistic forecasts now flashed continuous warnings as another corporate partner delayed implementation until the company's systems could be stabilized. Claire Morgan stood silently at the front of the room, holding Nathan's 7-month-old engineering report. She had already read every page twice. Each paragraph described the same technical weakness the consultants were only beginning to understand. Every recommendation had been submitted through the proper channels. Every warning had been documented with dates, testing results, and practical solutions. She slowly looked around the room before speaking. "Find Mr. Brooks," she said quietly. Right now. There was no hesitation this time. Human Resources immediately searched employee records while department managers attempted to reach Nathan through every available contact. The first calls went unanswered because Nathan was exactly where he always promised he would be after work whenever Lily had no school activities. He was standing beside the kitchen counter helping his daughter prepare homemade pizza for dinner while soft music played in the background. Flour dust covered the countertop as Lily laughed after accidentally dropping a slice of pepperoni onto the floor. Nathan smiled and handed her another piece. "Nobody becomes a great cook without making a few mistakes," he joked. His phone vibrated several times inside his jacket pocket, but he ignored it until the pizza finally went into the oven. Only then did he notice the long list of missed calls along with one brief message from Claire. "Mr. Brooks, I owe you an apology. We need your help. Please contact me as soon as possible." Nathan quietly read the message twice before placing the phone back on the counter. Lily looked up from setting the dinner table. "Is everything okay, Dad?" she asked. Nathan nodded gently. "Someone at work is facing a difficult problem." Lily smiled in the simple way only children can. "You always help people when you can." Nathan looked at his daughter with quiet pride. "I try." Less than an hour later, after making sure Lily was comfortably settled at home with a trusted neighbor, Nathan drove back toward the glowing skyline of downtown Chicago. Rain reflected across the city streets as he entered the familiar headquarters carrying the same worn leather folder that had been dismissed the previous afternoon. Security personnel greeted him with unexpected respect before escorting him directly to the executive floor. When the conference room doors opened, every conversation immediately stopped. Claire walked toward him without waiting behind the head of the table. Her confident posture remained, but the pride that had once filled the room had disappeared. She met Nathan's eyes with complete sincerity. "Mr. Brooks," she said softly, "before we discuss our systems, there is something more important that needs to be said. Yesterday, I judged your position instead of your character. I dismissed your warning without giving it the respect it deserved. I was wrong, and I am truly sorry." The room became completely silent. Nathan listened without interruption before offering a calm smile. "Thank you, Ms. Morgan," he replied. "What matters most now is protecting the people who depend on this company." Without another word, he placed his leather folder on the conference table, opened it beside the live system reports, and as every executive leaned forward to watch, the quiet engineer everyone had underestimated prepared to reveal the truth they had been unable to see all along. The conference room remained perfectly still as Nathan Brooks spread several engineering diagrams across the polished table beside the live system reports. No one interrupted him. The laughter that had echoed through the room the previous afternoon had been replaced by complete attention. Nathan quietly connected his laptop to the presentation screen before displaying a series of network diagrams, historical performance logs, and testing records collected over the previous 7 months. "The failures everyone is seeing today are only symptoms," he explained calmly. "The original problem began during a software synchronization update that changed how 3 independent systems communicate with one another. Each emergency repair corrected visible errors while unintentionally increasing instability underneath." The lead consultant leaned closer to the screen. "We never examined the original synchronization layer," he admitted. Nathan nodded respectfully. "That is because the early warning signs were almost invisible. Individually, they appeared harmless. Together, they created a chain reaction." Claire Morgan watched silently as Nathan opened the same leather folder she had dismissed only 1 day earlier. Every page contained handwritten notes, testing schedules, simulation results, and implementation plans prepared long before the crisis became public. Nathan pointed toward one timeline highlighted in blue. "Here is where I first noticed inconsistent authentication responses. 2 weeks later, I submitted my first recommendation. After additional testing confirmed the pattern, I submitted 3 more reports with updated projections." Claire quietly recognized her own electronic approval signatures, showing that every report had entered the company's system exactly as Nathan described. They had simply never reached the people responsible for making the final technical decisions. Nathan continued without criticism. "The good news is that the architecture itself remains sound. We do not need to rebuild the platform. We need to restore proper synchronization in the correct sequence." He outlined a recovery plan consisting of carefully ordered stages that isolated affected network clusters, restored archived verification protocols, rebuilt synchronization tables, and gradually returned each system to normal operation without interrupting customer services. The operations director immediately coordinated engineering teams throughout the building, while senior specialists followed Nathan's instructions step by step. Large monitoring screens updated continuously as employees worked with renewed focus. Minutes later, the first network cluster stabilized. A quiet voice called across the operations center. "Primary synchronization restored." Moments later, another engineer smiled with cautious relief. "Customer authentication is recovering." One by one, warning indicators disappeared from the giant display wall. Performance graphs climbed steadily upward as suspended services returned online. Financial analysts refreshed live projections before looking at one another in disbelief. The losses that had threatened the company only hours earlier were rapidly shrinking. Claire stood beside Nathan, watching the final verification complete successfully. The continuous emergency alarms that had echoed through headquarters for nearly 2 days suddenly stopped. Silence filled the room, followed by a deep collective breath from employees who finally realized the crisis had passed. No one applauded immediately. Instead, everyone simply looked toward the quiet engineer whose patience, preparation, and humility had accomplished what expensive consulting firms could not. Nathan closed his laptop and carefully returned every document to the worn leather folder. "The system should remain stable now," he said softly. "I recommend additional monitoring over the next several days, but the immediate danger has passed." Claire lowered her eyes before looking back at him. In that single moment, she understood that true leadership had never been sitting at the head of the conference table. It had quietly entered the room carrying an old leather folder, asking only for the chance to protect people before asking for recognition. The following morning, sunlight filled the executive floor of Ashton Technologies with a quietness no one had experienced in days. The emergency alerts had disappeared, the monitoring screens displayed steady green indicators, and messages from relieved corporate partners continued arriving throughout the operations center. Financial analysts confirmed that the company had avoided losses worth hundreds of millions of dollars, while engineering teams carefully observed the stabilized systems exactly as Nathan Brooks had recommended. Yet despite everything that had happened, Nathan arrived at work carrying the same worn leather folder and wearing the same simple blue work shirt beneath his familiar navy jacket. He greeted the security staff, smiled at the reception desk, and quietly returned to his engineering workstation as though nothing extraordinary had taken place. Several younger engineers approached him with genuine admiration, thanking him for saving months of work and protecting the company's future. Nathan simply smiled. "We all protected it together," he answered. "A strong system is never built by one person." His words surprised many of them because they expected someone who had just rescued the company to enjoy the recognition. Instead, Nathan spent the morning patiently explaining technical principles, reviewing documentation, and helping newer engineers understand why the crisis had happened so they would never repeat the same mistake. Upstairs, the board of directors gathered for another meeting. This time, no emergency alarms interrupted the discussion. Instead, every conversation centered on one subject. Claire Morgan stood before the board, holding Nathan's leather folder in both hands. "Yesterday," she began quietly, "our company was saved by someone we failed to respect." No one argued. Every director remembered the moment Nathan had calmly raised his hand before being dismissed. Every person in the room had now read the engineering reports he submitted months earlier. One board member slowly spoke. "His technical ability is remarkable." Claire gently shook her head. "His character is even more remarkable." She looked around the table before continuing. "Most people who experience public humiliation would refuse to return. Nathan came back without anger, without pride, and without asking for anything in return. He chose responsibility over recognition." The room fell silent as every executive reflected upon those words. The chairman finally nodded. "Then we have a responsibility as well." Later that afternoon, Nathan received an invitation to attend a special meeting with the board. Believing they simply wanted another technical update, he entered the familiar conference room carrying only his notebook. As soon as he walked inside, every member of the board quietly stood. Nathan looked genuinely surprised. Claire stepped forward first. "Mr. Brooks," she said with sincere humility, "on behalf of every leader in this company, thank you. Your knowledge restored our systems, but your integrity restored something even more valuable. You reminded us that leadership begins with listening." Nathan accepted her words with the same calm expression he had carried throughout the entire crisis. "I appreciate your kindness," he replied. "I only hope we remember that good ideas do not become more valuable because they come from important people. They become valuable because they help others." Once again, complete silence filled the room. No executive reached for another report. No consultant offered another opinion. Every person understood that the quiet engineer standing before them had just shared a lesson more important than any business strategy they had ever discussed. And in that unforgettable moment, the truth that Nathan carried was no longer hidden inside a leather folder. It had become the new foundation upon which the entire company would begin rebuilding its future. 1 week after the crisis had ended, every employee at Ashton Technologies received an invitation to attend a company-wide meeting in the main auditorium. No explanation accompanied the announcement, and curiosity spread quickly through every department. Engineers, accountants, designers, managers, and executives quietly filled the seats beneath the warm stage lights while conversations faded into silence. Nathan Brooks entered carrying his familiar leather folder and chose a seat near the back of the room, hoping to remain unnoticed. He believed the gathering would focus on the company's recovery and future projects. Instead, the lights dimmed, and Claire Morgan slowly walked onto the stage. She stood alone beneath the spotlight for several moments before speaking. Today is not about celebrating financial success, she began. It is about correcting a failure in leadership. Every eye remained fixed on her. Claire took a slow breath before continuing. Last week, I publicly dismissed a colleague because I believed his position mattered more than his wisdom. I laughed when I should have listened. I judged appearance instead of character. That mistake almost cost this company everything we had built together. The auditorium became completely still. Claire stepped away from the podium and walked directly toward Nathan, who immediately stood with quiet respect as she approached. Looking him in the eyes, she spoke clearly enough for every employee to hear. Mr. Brooks, I owe you an apology in front of every person who witnessed my mistake. You warned us long before the crisis appeared. You acted with integrity when you were ignored. And when we finally asked for your help, you returned without anger or pride. I was wrong, and I am deeply sorry. Nathan listened quietly before offering a gentle smile. Thank you, Ms. Morgan, he replied. I accept your apology. Claire nodded gratefully, but Nathan continued speaking in the same calm voice that had never changed. Throughout the entire experience, the lesson is larger than either of us. Every company is filled with people whose ideas may never reach the right ears. If we create a culture where respect depends upon job titles, we will continue overlooking the people trying hardest to protect one another. Every voice deserves to be heard before it is judged. His words settled across the auditorium with remarkable simplicity. No dramatic music played. No one interrupted the silence. One employee slowly rose from a seat near the front of the room. Moments later, another stood. Then another. Within seconds, hundreds of employees were standing together, not cheering loudly but honoring the quiet engineer with respectful silence. Claire joined them without hesitation, understanding that genuine respect required no applause. Nathan lowered his eyes with humble gratitude, uncomfortable with being the center of attention, yet grateful that the lesson had reached so many people. As the meeting ended, employees from every department approached him, not to praise his intelligence, but to thank him for reminding them what true professionalism looked like. Nathan shook every hand with the same quiet kindness, then gathered his worn leather folder and headed toward the parking garage. The recognition he received inside the auditorium meant little compared with the thought waiting in his heart. Lily would soon finish school, and he did not want to be late. As he drove through the afternoon streets of Chicago beneath a clear autumn sky, he smiled softly, knowing that the greatest victories are never measured by public applause, but by the example a father leaves for the child waiting patiently to come home. Several months passed, and Ashton Technologies became a noticeably different company. The impressive financial recovery attracted attention across the industry, yet the greatest transformation could not be measured by quarterly reports or rising market value. It could be seen in the way meetings were conducted, in the questions leaders now asked before making decisions, and in the respect shown to employees whose voices had once been overlooked. Claire Morgan personally introduced a new leadership principle requiring every major engineering recommendation to receive direct technical review before executive approval. She often reminded senior managers that the best ideas rarely announced themselves with the loudest voices. Nathan Brooks accepted none of the public attention that continued following him after the crisis. Every morning he arrived carrying the same weathered leather folder, greeted coworkers with the same warm smile, and quietly returned to solving engineering problems alongside the rest of his team. He declined offers for a larger office and politely turned down interviews requested by several business magazines. The work matters more than the recognition, he would often say. Instead, he accepted one responsibility that genuinely interested him. Claire invited him to establish a mentorship program for young engineers beginning their careers. Nathan agreed on one condition. Every participant should feel comfortable asking questions without worrying about titles, he explained. Learning grows where respect already exists. Every Friday afternoon, groups of new engineers gathered inside a simple training room overlooking the Chicago skyline. Nathan never began with technical formulas. He began with character. He encouraged careful listening before offering solutions, patient observation before making assumptions, and honest documentation before drawing conclusions. He explained that engineering was ultimately about protecting people rather than protecting personal pride. The younger employees listened with complete attention because every lesson came from experience rather than theory. Claire quietly attended several sessions without announcing herself. Sitting near the back of the room, she watched Nathan patiently answer every question regardless of how simple it seemed. He celebrated curiosity more than perfect answers and praised teamwork more than individual brilliance. Walking back toward her office after one session, Claire realized she had spent years searching for exceptional leaders while overlooking one who had quietly worked only a few floors below her. That evening, Nathan returned home just before sunset carrying a small box of leftover cookies from the mentoring session. Lily opened the front door with her familiar smile and immediately asked about his day. "Did you teach anything interesting today?" she asked. Nathan laughed softly. "I tried to teach that listening carefully is sometimes more important than speaking first." Lily nodded thoughtfully. "That sounds like something you have always done." Nathan looked around the warm kitchen where dinner slowly cooked on the stove, school books rested on the table, and family photographs filled the shelves. The house remained modest, but it was rich with peace, gratitude, and purpose. He realized that everything he had hoped to protect during the crisis had always been waiting here. Across the city, the lights inside Ashton Technologies reflected against the evening sky, illuminating a company that had become stronger not simply because its systems were repaired, but because its people had learned that humility creates trust, respect creates wisdom, and quiet dignity can transform an entire organization long after the applause has faded. 1 year later, visitors entering Ashton Technologies often admired the company's innovation, impressive growth, and collaborative culture without realizing that its greatest transformation had never appeared inside an annual report. New employees quickly noticed something unusual during their first weeks. Every proposal received careful attention regardless of who submitted it. Junior engineers felt comfortable asking difficult questions. Senior leaders listened before making decisions. Respect had quietly become part of the company's foundation. Nathan Brooks remained exactly where he had always wanted to be. Every morning he parked the same aging pickup truck, carried the same weathered leather folder through the front entrance, greeted the security team by name, and walked toward the engineering department with the same calm smile. Promotions and recognition had never changed him because they had never been the reason he came to work. His greatest priority still waited outside the office every afternoon. As the school bell rang across suburban Chicago, Lily ran toward the familiar pickup truck with the same joyful smile she had carried since childhood. Their drive home remained filled with conversations about school projects, books, dreams, and ordinary moments that quietly became extraordinary memories. Nathan often believed those simple conversations mattered more than any meeting he had ever attended. Claire Morgan also carried the lessons of that unforgettable week into every decision she made. Before approving important initiatives, she regularly visited engineering teams, listened to concerns, and encouraged open discussion across every department. Whenever young managers asked how the company's culture had changed so dramatically, she always offered the same answer. Never underestimate the quiet person who speaks with preparation instead of pride. Those words gradually became one of the organization's guiding principles. One autumn afternoon, Ashton Technologies welcomed a group of university engineering students for a leadership seminar. During the final discussion, one student asked Claire what had been the most valuable lesson of her entire career. She looked across the room toward Nathan, who was patiently helping another student understand a technical diagram. Smiling gently, she answered, "The greatest lesson was learning that truth does not become more important because an executive says it. Truth remains truth even when it comes from the quietest person in the room." Nathan never heard her answer because he remained focused on helping the students around him. That simple moment reflected exactly who he had always been. Later that evening, father and daughter sat together on the front porch watching the golden sunset settle across their peaceful neighborhood. Lily looked at her father and asked, "Do you think people can really become better after making mistakes?" Nathan smiled softly before answering, "Yes. The moment someone chooses humility over pride and kindness over judgment, they begin becoming the person they were meant to be." Lily rested her head against his shoulder as the last rays of sunlight disappeared beyond the trees. Across the city, office lights slowly faded inside Ashton Technologies, but the lesson born from one painful moment continued shining inside every decision made within its walls. The room that once echoed with laughter had long since fallen silent. Yet the truth carried by one humble single father continued speaking every day through compassion, quiet dignity, unwavering integrity, and the example he left for his daughter, his colleagues, and everyone who discovered that the strongest voice in any room is often the one that never needs to be raised. Thank you for watching. Subscribe for more stories of courage, kindness, and second chances, because the people the world overlooks often leave the greatest impact.